I'm really grateful for all of you who are here and listening. I'm grateful to the Galena Library and to Larissa for helping arrange this. So we are here because I wrote this book. It's called All Who Belong May Enter. It's a collection of personal essays that I wrote over the course of many years. I am a storyteller and a writer who works in Chicago with an organization called Second Story, where we curate and craft first person true stories that we tell now over Zoom, but often in the before times we used to tell them live in person in bars and restaurants around Chicago. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and then I'll talk a little bit about it as I go, but I'm absolutely happy to answer some questions. So the book itself is broken up into 3 sections that are loosely organized around themes of masculinity and whiteness, and sort of thinking through and teasing out my relationship to some of these systems of power and personal identities that I hold. And so the first section of the book is really about how I operate in spaces with other men and boys, and the ways in which we do or do not play games to kind of prove our masculinity. The second section is what I'm going to start with, though, and that covers a chunk of terrain from my days waiting tables. I worked in restaurants for 20 years as a server primarily, and actually entirely as a server from 1998 up until 2018. And that was a really formative part of my life and a formative experience. So I'm gonna read the first essay in the second chapter. The first essay in the second section, and that is called Mid-America's Finest. And so we'll start there. I stared at the soups. They'd been congealing all day, deep pans hissing away in their steamer tray. Burnt edges lined the sides. I pulled 2 of the white bean soup trays and set them on the counter. Chad, I called to our kitchen manager, calling over my shoulder towards the grill line. Combine or toss? Combine, he said, not looking up from the grill. Across from me, Hillary closed to the dessert station, plastic wrapping our world-famous chocolate cake. Cigarette? I asked her. Duh, she said. Arion, I called to the fry cook who stood near Chad. Drop chicken and fries? Drop them yourself, man, Arion said with the same flatness he'd had in English class when I asked him if he could score me weed. I watched Matt and Brad serve the last guests, bickering while they shut down the coffee station. Chimes clanked, another 2-top walking in. Evelyn was gone for the night, so they rock, paper, scissored for the table. Brad lost on the 3rd try. Matt danced a jig. Angel, Chad's right hand at the grill station, tapped me on the shoulder. He still wore the fishnet cap that kept his black hair in place. In high school, he ran with the Goths, a senior when I was a freshman, and scared me a little. For the last time, he slipped my paycheck out of my back pocket. Fold this up. I shrugged. They'd have to figure out how to cash it without my signature. He grinned. There are ways. For 2 years in high school, on evenings and weekends and during the summer, I waited tables at Bill Knapp's, a family diner-style restaurant chain that could be found in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Florida during the 90s. This branch was just up the street from my subdivision. At the time I worked there, I thought I was just passing through, earning cash for gas and other indulgences before I moved on to college, to my real life. But after 2 decades spent waiting tables, I still remember my first restaurant, what it looked like, how it smelled, the food we served, my coworkers, and how we might have tried to pass the time. After the shift, we'd congregate over cigarettes and fried food in the break room, a pair of unused diner tables off the dish pit. The servers counted their tips up, strange practice in front of the cooks and dishwashers, who never made more than their hourly allotment. If it was just me and Hillary, I'd ask about her kids. They're the best thing to ever happen to me, she once said, her face brightening. I remember when she was the prettiest girl in school. I remember when she disappeared from the hallways in high school. I remember thinking that if the best thing to ever happen to her was her family, She was right. What was the point of school? When do you leave? Ariane asked that night. 2 weeks, I replied. Excited? A little. I was bursting with anticipation about college in Ohio, but I tried to remain cool. I didn't know what Ariane's prospects were. Brad and Matt came back, the guests all gone. They nibbled our food and lit their smokes. Rolling tonight? Hillary asked. Of course, Matt said, brushing his shaggy hair from his face. It's summer, Brad said by way of explanation. The rest of the crew waited in someone's nearby garage. How many pills? I asked. 2, Brad said. His mischievous smile framed a chipped tooth. Always 2. They were the ringleaders, older than the rest, the high schoolers, recent grads, and dropouts. Want to come? Brad asked. He's partying with us tomorrow, Matt said. Brad winked at me. Tomorrow, then. Yeah, I told my parents I wanted to hang out with you one last time before I left, I said. Oh, that's cute. It was Chad. Cigarette perched in his mouth, Angel behind him. Cash outs, Chad said. We thrust our receipts and owed cash into his palms. Now get the fuck out of here. He didn't mean it. Chad's face may have seen a few fights, but he was pretty relaxed. His girlfriend, Judy, one of the floor managers, was as uptight as Chad was loose. I could have dashed off to a party where all my high school friends embodied slight variations on the same theme, similar hairstyle and background and soon-to-be colleges. Often, I'd rather sit in the back break area and talk shit with my coworkers over greasy food and cigarettes. It was where I felt I could truly be myself, unhindered from any social pressures or even my own ambition. A fair amount of my work friends were kids who attended my high school, but who I never spoke to before working together. We moved in different circles at school, but at naps, we were together. Work pushed me to get to know them more than was ever possible in school. We dispersed eventually. Brad and Matt and Angel to their party, Hillary to her young family, Chad to Judy, Ariane to Detroit proper. I went home, across Grand River Avenue and into my subdivision. In the driveway, after my parents went to sleep, I smoked more cigarettes and imagined what it would be like when I left my home and never came back. The very first Bill Knapp's restaurant opened in Battle Creek, Michigan in the 1940s, 100 miles west of my hometown of Farmington. Billing itself mid-America's finest, the offerings were common for the area. Chicken and biscuits, white bean soup, mom's meatloaf. And at the height of the franchise, food was made from scratch in 3 commissaries and shipped off to 69 restaurants in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Florida. Every Bill Knapp's looked more or less the same. A New England-style colonial with a T-shaped dining room and a friendly matron ringing up checks on a vintage cash register. As a kid, I looked forward to lunch there with my grandfather. The children's menu organized items by animal. I liked the elephant, a chicken fricassee, and there was always chocolate cake at the end. Gooey with a rich layer of frosting, the dessert became Bill Knapp's calling card. Even still, I thought Bill Knapp's was pretty uncool, and I couldn't understand how anyone worked there until I did myself. See, my father had decided it was time to get a job, to get out of the house and learn some hardworking American values. Now, I didn't need to work. I was a middle-class only child. I didn't have to help with bills or rent. My parents had promised to help for college. My dad had even passed down his '94 turquoise Ford Escort to me once I turned 16. With the car came gas money and the desire for cash to blow while driving, bored around the suburbs. I was vaguely aware that I was lucky, but I didn't quite realize how special it was to have parents with stable incomes, to only have to work for fun money. The guy from my high school told me he was making pretty good money waiting tables at Knapp's, and they were hiring. So while my friends idled at the local video store or Subway, I started making some real cash. Not that I knew what to do with it, not that I listened when I was told I should save it. If I had had to pay bills and rent and car insurance, I would have barely gotten by on what I made. But it was more money than I'd seen in my life, and it was hand delivered each night in cash, plus a paycheck every 2 weeks with a little bit more. It was money that I alone earned, money that I alone was responsible for, money that I could slap down and say, this is mine. On my last Saturday morning, Angel and I rolled in around 10 o'clock to open. I opted to set up the salad station, which involved making coleslaw. 2 large plastic bags arrived in a set, one with julienne carrots and cabbage, the other a neon yellow dressing. We didn't have any mixing bowls, so we cut a slit in the top of the dressing bag, poured it into the slaw, and gave a few hearty shakes. Flecks of yellow material splashed on my bright blue shirt. Chad called over from the line. "You look like you're vomiting yourself." I shrugged. "I won't need this anymore." "You'll miss us," Angel said, still up from last night's party. Each week, the same single diners waited at the front door or sat in their cars in the parking lot until we opened. They were older men with tufts of wispy white hair. They clutched coupons cut from the local paper, thin slips offering 3-course meals for $5.99. Evelyn, the lead hostess, called each man by name as she helped them to their table. And by noon, we hummed. Young hostesses rushed to set up high chairs. Waiters ferried large trays of food across 3 dining rooms. Evelyn sprinted back and forth between the door and the register. She approached her job with rigor. I wondered what it must have been like, working with people so much younger than her. With her hair in a beehive and glasses attached by a chain around her neck, she looked like she stepped out of a bygone era. I can't imagine the old men coming back each week if it wasn't for her. One day, early on in my NAPS tenure, I took a to-go order. It was every server's responsibility from time to time, and no one wanted it. The woman stressed to me that I shouldn't forget her order of peas. We always forgot her order of peas, so I needed to make sure I didn't. "Yes, ma'am. Of course. I understand." I forgot her order of peas. She called the manager, Judy, in a rage. Judy came up to me, terse. "Why did you forget that woman's order of peas?" Mistakes happen in a restaurant all the time. It's a chaotic, stressful, high-stakes environment. So instead of apologizing, I snapped. "You know what? I don't care," I shouted. I was standing in the back hallway where we kept the high chairs, my voice loud enough to be heard in the dining room. Judy snapped. "Your attitude sucks. Go home and cool off." She wasn't that much older than me. Now that I think about it, 22 or 23. NAPS may have been an after-school job, but I wanted to do it well, better than anybody else. So when I made mistakes, I lost my temper. It took me a long while not to lose my cool, long after I left NAPS and well into my professional career as a server. But one thing I did learn in the time I spent at Bill Knapp's was how to subsume the job into my body until I felt like an athlete in the zone. And that outburst was almost 2 years before my last shift. And by that final Saturday, I bopped around, grooving to the music while battling away the chaos. "More crayons for your son who ate them?" "Absolutely." 77-cent tip in dimes and pennies? Scoop that up. "Why, yes, Mom is back there making her very own meatloaf. You want some?" "And what can I bring for you today?" I asked a booth of 2 men. The younger one, my father's age, squinted at his coupon. "White bean soup, steak medium well, baked potato, broccoli, and chocolate cake, I guess." "And for you?" I asked the man opposite him, still wearing his coat indoors, his mouth hanging open. He raised his eyes in my direction. "Fiddler on the Roof," he shouted. "What?" I asked. "Dad." The son leaned across the table and tried to grab his father's hands. "Dad, what do you want? Steak? A meatloaf?" "Fiddler on the Roof." I wanted to laugh. imagining a 30-year-old musical rattling around in his brain. But I could hear the ding from the kitchen announcing a pickup, and one table needed water and another wanted their check. I didn't have time to linger with these two, last day or not. Dad? The son asked again. My father put his head low, leaned over the retro countertop, and vomited on the table. His son tried to push away as the chunks threatened to spill over onto the carpeting. I stepped back. Is everything, I'll take care of this. It was Judy, at my side with a taut smile and a handful of dish rags. I understand we had a little accident, she said to the table. She was never that soft with the staff, but I could see in that moment how much Judy cared for our guests. I spun on my heels, off to a new task. A few minutes later, while scooping white bean soup into 2 bowls, Judy found me. They're good. They're going to try to eat, she said. Thank you. I said, I did not want to clean that up. It's your last day, she said. Otherwise, I would have pushed your nose in it. I smiled. Angel was right. I'd missed this place. By 1998, when I started working there, Bill Knapp's had been sold to a California-based conglomerate. The new corporate overlords rolled out a rebranding campaign that was called That Was Then, This Is Wow. Select franchises installed flat screen TVs, video game consoles pumping extra loud rock and roll through the speakers, and painted the interior an array of fuchsias, turquoises, and purples. They even removed certain staples from the menu. Our store in Farmington didn't receive the upgrade, but Livonia did, and we siphoned off their business. Families with young kids couldn't dine with all that racket. Teenagers sensed the pandering a mile away. Their core clientele, those solo diners who arrived by rote ritual, they moved on. No one really asked us, the servers or the managers, what we thought. No one got a chance to know the customers. No one arrived at the store on a weekday morning in the winter to watch the quiet but earnest exchange between guest and worker. When we envision the American waiter or waitress, who do we think of? Maybe an overly cheery, plump woman at a roadside diner who calls guests hun, or a pretentious, suit-jacketed man opening and pouring a bottle of wine. Or perhaps we think of the person I was for most of my serving career, a young artist trying to balance rent and pursuing the dreams that don't make him enough money to live. In truth, we are all of those things, and none of them. We are young and old, cynical and idealistic, students and dropouts and graduates and doctors with families and pets and mortgages and bills. In 1998, almost 2 million people worked as servers in this country. On average, they made 12 grand a year, about $19,000 in today's money. That's not enough to live on, to buy groceries and make car payments and buy rent then or now. Most servers are subject to firing at a moment's notice, products of at-will employment. Most don't get asked about big decisions at the restaurant. Most of them just grind away. As the divide between the haves and the have-nots widen in this country, between executives who make the decisions and the underpaid workers who carry them out, I think about my first restaurant job with rose-tinted nostalgia. It seemed to me then that we were all in this together, responsible for making something special for our guests, for taking care of each other when we needed to. But maybe that's bullshit too. Maybe we were just people, working for ourselves and our families, exploited by corporate America. After that final Saturday shift, I joined Matt and Brad and the rest of their crew for one of their raves. They used to roll every weekend, sometimes both Friday and Saturday. Often, over the course of 2 years, they asked me if I wanted to join them. I always demurred. I was no prude. I drank, got high often, smoked cigarettes constantly, but the amount of partying they did surprised me. Their ecstasy use felt like a step too far, even when they explained that they were young, that they worked hard, that they'd earned it. I also worried I'd get too attached to those people, not just my friends, but everyone in the sprawling scene, that I'd loved them and their lifestyle too much to walk away. But finally, I relented. One night couldn't hurt. Before the party, standing in someone's garage, Brad handed me 2 pills. Lots of water, Matt said. You might feel nausea. I feel it too. Don't take them both at once, Brad said. That's important, Matt said, stabbing the air with his cigarette. Take the second a few hours after the first. Brad gave me a shoulder pat. Just stay close. The party was in the woods off I-96. Matt's beat-up sedan pulled onto a gravel road through a thicket of trees. We stopped at a clearing. Spotlights shone on a barn. Young kids directed us to park on a bedding of hay. Inside, DJs spun techno, kids danced with glow sticks, and people wore bright colors and baggy pants. We fanned out. I took the first pill. Nothing happened. I took the second pill. That feeling Matt described, the nausea sensation, bubbled to the surface, and I couldn't control it. So when no one was looking, I vomited onto a tractor in the corner of the barn. And that is when the drugs kicked in. I felt light, airy, speedy. I needed swift movement. There was a beat. I started dancing by myself in a little circle, kicking my legs and popping my arms. Somebody offered me Special K, but I didn't need anything else, just the music and the lights and a place to dance. Suddenly the music cut. The lights came on. I stopped spinning. Everyone scattered, trying to get out before they got caught. I scanned the barn. I couldn't see anyone. Bodies moved around me. Where had they all gone? Matt grabbed me. We're here, he said, face emerging from the chaos. Brad stood just beyond him. It never occurred to me that they might leave me. Oh, I guess that may have been possible. Somehow I just knew that they'd take care of me, make sure I was safe. We filed outside. Maybe I should have been more concerned about police activity ruining the rest of my life, but I knew they had nothing on me, that they couldn't see the drugs in my system. All I was doing was trespassing. It didn't look like the cops were arresting people, just checking every car for drugs. Sit in front with me, Matt said. Are you okay to drive? I asked once we got past the police. Yeah, he said as he eased onto the main road. I drive better like this. I had to believe him. I didn't have a choice. It started to rain as we merged onto the highway. Matt leaned forward to see his shitty windshield wipers ineffectual. Don't worry, he said. I got this. And he did. I arrived home safely the next day. A few weeks later, I went off to college. It would be convenient to claim that a great reawakening inside myself, that the culmination of my work life and my first hard drug experience lifted me into a greater plane of clarity from which to view my life. But in the moment, I just wanted to get home safe, sleep, and leave. That was then. This Is Wow failed so spectacularly that they purchased local radio ads years later, apologizing to their guests and announcing a return to the old decor, menu, and aesthetic. But the damage had been done. Bill Knapp's closed all their stores in one fell swoop in 2002. I heard everyone showed up for work that morning, but the doors of the restaurant had been padlocked. I was in college in Southern Ohio, surrounded by cornfields and sky. I'd begun working at a small fine dining restaurant in town. I wore a pressed white shirt and tie and learned about wine and service. In some ways, it was better job training than I received at the university, since I would move to Chicago and find a life in restaurants. When I heard news of the closing, I thought about my old coworkers, about Hillary with 2 kids by 19, about Judy and Matt, who had built careers in the company, about Judy and Chad, who had built careers in the company, about Matt and Brad and the rest of their crew, working doubles to roll on the weekends. Thought about Evelyn and the old men she greeted each Saturday morning. I don't know what happened to any of them. I know now that I never really belonged to Bill Knapp's, that I was both within and without, and that it was my fault for being in this position. I'd spend my whole life in restaurants like this, feeling like I never expected to be there in the first place. I sometimes wonder if that means I denigrated my colleagues, that I placed distance between us. I assumed I was just passing through from one version of my life to the next. At the beginning, I never imagined that the restaurant life would get under my skin and stay there. I feel guilt about my past assumptions. I feel like I missed opportunities to get to know my old colleagues on a deeper level, to follow the trajectory of their lives, to find communion the further we got away from our jobs. I wish I had gone to more of their parties. A new restaurant never replaced Bill Knapp's on that stretch of Grand River Avenue where the apartment complexes meet the highway, where the shopping mall got torn down and replaced by a sleek glass building inconsistent with its previous land use. When I travel to my parents' house, I always peek at the land of my first real job. Now, a medical group shares space with a dentist's office. The new building is closer to the road. The facade is polished and bland, but it's the same A-frame colonial design, holding some shadow of the past. I wonder if anybody else remembers it. If they drive by and pull in, looking for chicken fricassee and chocolate cake. If they recall that after-work smoke with almost friends. If they search in vain for something that used to be. So that essay in many ways sort of describes some of the politics of that section of the book where I read a lot about working in restaurants, and a lot of the way that restaurants are structured is sort of profoundly unequal, and it creates a profoundly unequal power structure, not only between the owners of the restaurants and the customers of the restaurants, but within the restaurants themselves, where you have all these kinds of people who are coming together on a shared task, really sort of making wildly different levels of income, from the cooks who often work the most and make the least to the servers, at least in fine dining restaurants, will make the most in tips, but maybe in a smaller diner could kind of go either way. And so, yeah, I think that really kind of describes some of how I see, not only my hometown, but also my life in restaurants. So I'm going to read one more short piece before opening up for questions. So get your questions ready. I wish I could read longer. There's a lot to cover in the book, but I'm going to stick in the same kind of location, which is the small suburb that I grew up about 30 minutes outside of Detroit called Farmington, that really serves as a lot of inspiration for the book. In ways that I think are quite obvious, and in ways that maybe I try to subvert a little bit that kind of small Midwestern town upbringing. So this is an opportunity, this part of the book is a chance to sort of subvert a little bit of that small Midwestern upbringing and what it says about people. So I'm just going to read, this is relatively short. It's from a much longer essay about my best friend who passed away 16 years ago, my best friend from high school. So this is about us. I met Paul Myers in the first grade. When I sat down in Ms. Delaney's class and asked the chubby kid behind me what animal he had on his shirt. Without dropping focus from the jungle gym, Paul answered, meerkats. Everything about him illuminated my own deficiencies. He was a great baseball player. I barely made contact. His family lived on a farm where they raised chickens. I lived in a subdivision. He wore thrift store t-shirts at 7 years old, which seemed cool even then, like Paulie woke up each morning with his own sense of style. My mom dressed me. The first time he came over to my house, he brought a boombox and asked, "Do you like to dance?" We spent the few hours before my parents called us to dinner dancing to Kylie Minogue's Locomotion in my basement. He was my first real friend. As the only child of two working parents, I grew up around other kids, spent afternoons after school at houses in the subdivision, but all those people were thrust upon me. I chose Paul. And when Patty came along, we'd been friends for 11 years, weaving in and out and back into each other's lives. Patricia Wheeler Patty, for short, moved to Farmington with her parents and two younger siblings at the beginning of junior year, where she hooked up with the goth kids. Paul and I knew them as a quiet and friendly group, harmless despite the black trench coats, eye makeup, and painted fingernails. Patty wore flannel shirts, but was forever in their company. It was early December, 1998, a Wednesday, when word surfaced about Mike Heller, a sophomore in their set. Mike was a boisterous kid we'd gone to school with since the second grade. I remember that morning vividly. Paul and I stood at our lockers across from the teacher's lounge. We watched smoke seep out behind the cracks of the closed door, dancing into the crowded hallway. What the hell? Paul asked. You didn't hear? Mike Heller killed himself. Paul held his eyes on the closed door. He had shot up past me, dwarfing me by 5 inches. He looked like a man in his 20s, while I remained a boy in my teens. They're letting them smoke in there, Paul said. That's smart. The door opened and they filed out, clinging to each other as they shuffled to class. Patty, hair pulled back, eyes puffy behind her glasses, saw us and peeled off from the group. She gave me a big, silent hug. Then she moved down to Paul, who bent down to give her an awkward squeeze. Okay, Patty said, straightening, wiping her eyes. Time to go to class. Who is that? Paul asked after she was clear. Patty Wheeler, I replied. Your friends? He asked. Yeah, I guess I don't know her, but she gives long hugs. I think maybe she's in my English class, Paul said, and I've never noticed her. Later that year, as all the juniors were saying their summer goodbyes, Patty asked me, can we hang out? I need new friends. Things had spiraled into chaos for the Goths after Mike Heller's death, fueled by drinking and blaming each other for his suicide. I told Patty she could come along with us any Saturday she wanted to go record shopping and drive around. And so we became a team, a fortress against the outside world. No girlfriends or boyfriends or parents or the future could get in. We were Nick and Paul and Patty, together always. Homecoming, football games, parties, the hallway at school. It was Patty's kitchen floor where I cried about girls, smoking pot in Paul's old barn and listening to fears of his getting older. The all-night diner by the highway where we took Patty for cheesy fries the night she broke up with her boyfriend. We made a literary magazine together and even produced 2 plays. But by the time senior year wound down, we had our sights set on the Holy Grail, the talent show. We got to do something, I told them. It's our ritual. Paul and I were veterans of 2 previous high school talent shows. Well, I want in, Patty said. I want to leave everyone with a lasting impression. It was April. Graduation on the horizon, 3 different universities awaiting our arrival shortly after that. I didn't know it at the time, but the talent show was to be our last hurrah. We had cut AP English that day, our circle in the backyard, the best option for hashing out our act for the 3-hour spectacle that sent the entire student body nutty with anticipation. What are we going to do? Patty asked. We shifted our focus to Paul. He sat silently, one leg crossed over the other, thrift store cardigan hanging from his frame. He was so cool. He smoothed his hands over his forehead, up through his dirty blonde hair. Alice Cooper, Paul responded. I'm 18. That's our jam. It was an odd choice. At that time, Alice Cooper was known more for his absurd cameo in Wayne's World, not the anti-establishment rebel of his heyday, but goddamn, that song felt like us. We were 18, we were confused every day. We had to get out of this place. And one night, after a chaotic and sweaty rehearsal, Paul said, we're going to transcend everything. This show, this town, our lives. I hope you guys are ready. The stage at our high school was a gigantic proscenium that opened onto a 500-person house, and that night it was packed with students, parents, and teachers. We began in total darkness. A spotlight popped center to unveil our trio. I wore skin-tight leather pants and a maroon halter top, my arms held aloft, fingers extended into twin devil horns, the rock and roll salute. To my right, Paulie slouched like a 50s beatnik behind his 1994 40th anniversary edition midnight blue Fender Stratocaster, a kilt around his waist and pantyhose on his head. Patty posed to my left, suited up for the bass guitar in a brightly colored apron, worn over a bikini. The lights rose to reveal Tom, leader of the Goths, hunched over a drum kit, and Grant, the captain of the football team, on rhythm guitar with a turquoise shirt and painted fingernails. And before we even began, our fellow classmates went batshit crazy. Paulie peeled off a disgusting riff, cruising right into I'm 18, and the rest of us blasted off. I threw myself around like a man on fire, screaming the lyrics with joy. Tom banged the sticks with fury and abandon. Patty preened and pranced. Grant broke a string and buzzed out for the whole song. And Paul, deliberately, furiously, purposefully, he ripped off all the strings on that blue beauty, and the stage exploded in noise. I have watched this performance many times on VHS, and it wasn't perfect. The mix was a mess. Bass and drums were out of sync, and I couldn't sing nearly as well as I thought. But never in the history of the Great Lakes did three friends make rock and roll purer, rowdier, and freer than we did that night. Picture the stage smothered in fog, two hot white lights, Patty and I bouncing like maniacs, play acting at rock stardom. And then imagine Paul, nylon and kilt, classmates staring up at him in awe, parents in the back in disbelief. Watch him wail away at that guitar, reach way down inside himself to a place he'd never shown anyone. And maybe you won't be able to see it, to understand his struggle with life, with the simple burden of being alive, with confusion and anger and hunger for something, anything better. Maybe I didn't see it either. Maybe all I saw were three friends making noise. All right, thank you for listening. I'm open for questions if there are questions. I'm ready. I appreciate you all. I'm gonna have a little sip of my whiskey here. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. What is the title?
The title is All Who Belong May Enter.
And where, I mean, I haven't read it, but what does it mean? Can you tell me, or is that?
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you. Well, I'll tell you, and then maybe you'll read it and you'll come to a different conclusion. But for me, All Who Belong May Enter really looks at, I was saying before, it really looks at issues of masculinity and whiteness, which are kind of personal identities that I hold that benefit me, right? I think the world in many ways is set up to benefit, particularly like, you know, I'm a sort of upper middle class, so like an upper middle class white male experience. I don't really respond to that experience in the traditional ways. And so I feel as though my entrance into society is fixed in a particular way. And so I can try to escape that a little bit, but ultimately, like, it's outside of my control. And so that's what I think about when I think about All Who Belong May Enter. You know, there's definitely going to be folks who, with the way that our world is set up, like, cannot enter my experience, no matter what. I cannot really fully escape it, no matter what. And so that's kind of what it means. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think as a upper middle class woman, I cannot enter your experience.
That's right.
And I don't know if I want to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's part of it, right? It's like, I'm not entirely sure, you know, I'm not entirely sure that I want to always be participating in the things that benefit me. I certainly think that there's a certain angle of looking at like masculinity, for instance, where it's like, I don't want to participate in that. It's toxic and terrible, and it makes me feel bad. And I can see how it makes other men react and feel bad and like antagonistically sort of try to break out of that. So I hear that.
Yeah.
Oh, there's
And I know it's another question, but I guess it's a heavy burden. It's not just an advantage. It's also something you have to carry. Like when I hear you reading, I think it seems like an easy, breezy kind of existence, something I can relate to, being raised in a small town, Midwestern.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know all those things were taking form.
Yeah.
They were. Yeah. They really were.
I appreciate that. I'm going to answer Karen Lemstra's question in the chat, which is, when did I start writing essays? I started writing essays around the time that I moved to Chicago. I moved to Chicago in 2004, right after college. And so I did theater in college. I was an actor and a theater performance major. And I really wanted to like move to Chicago, take the city by storm. And I linked up very quickly with this organization called Second Story that was doing these, I thought at the time, like super new, radically interesting performance events where they would convene people in a bar, like a sort of normal night out in a restaurant. And then every like 20 minutes, somebody would pop up from a different location and tell a story. And the story was true and it was personal. And it would often be scored with music and sound design. And I was like, oh, I have to do this. Like, this is the thing for my life. And so I joined up with this group. And initially I joined up to help produce these events because I was so interested in what was happening. And then a woman named Megan Steelstra, who's an essayist in Chicago, walked up to me one day. She was one of our storytellers, and she was like, so when are you going to start writing? And that's kind of it. It's like 2006, really. And I had this story, part of what I read to you before. I had this story kind of burning in me because my best friend had just passed away. And it was a very challenging experience for a lot of reasons. And so I had this kind of burning story that I wanted to tell. And out of that is when I started like the writing journey and the real interest in wanting to use writing to think through like how I moved through the world or how I perceived the world. So yeah. Anybody else? I see some names on the screen I haven't heard from yet. Absolutely. Yeah, happy to talk about my publishing process. So I also, if you hear loud noises, it's because my radiators are acting up because it's very cold. So I started trying to get published in 2011 or so. No, later. Oh, I don't know, 2011, 2012. And really I started trying to submit my essays to online journals. And over that time, I was like, mildly successful. I had some successes. I had a lot of not successes. But over that time, I started to form the essays into this book here. And so really what I did was just, as I was working on material, I was then evaluating it like, is this good for the book? Is this going to work for what I'm trying to do? And was able to attend a 3-week residency at Ragdale, which is in Lake Forest, Illinois, and really spent about 5 years on and off, not full time, certainly, but 5 years on and off, writing, revising, adding, and submitting. And so I haven't counted, but I probably submitted the book at least 25 to 30 times. And then I saw a publishing house was having a year, like their annual prize, that was being judged by someone whose book I had just read and really admired and felt like was really the kind of thing that I wanted to do with my book. Her book is called Ordinary Girls by Jakira Diaz. She was the judge, and so I submitted it, and they awarded it. So that's how that goes. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to move through the publishing world, but that was mine. Anybody else? I love answering questions. And I do.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I tried to type something in the chat, but I don't know what happened to it. But anyway, I loved hearing you talk and read. You have a great voice. I could sit and listen to you for a long time. And I liked your experience telling about in high school with your friends. It kind of reminded me a little bit of my life too. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. I'll use that as an opportunity to pontificate a bit on what I think is like effective from a craft perspective, which is like, I don't know you, but I've never heard your name before, so I know we didn't grow up together. And I think it's interesting to me that you would say like, oh, that reminded me of my, my life growing up as well. And I think one of the things that I really love about personal essay writing and memoir, and even poetry, which I sort of consider a form of nonfiction, which is a bit controversial, but we'll let that slide, is that I think the more specific a writer can be with their experience, the more somebody else has an opportunity to graft their own experience onto it. So if a writer kind of generally describes like, oh yeah, like I grew up and there were like a lot of, there was like the mini mall where we used to hang out, like that's fine. That doesn't really paint a picture. But if they say every single day after school, I used to go to the Silver Dairy, which was our local version of a Dairy Queen. And I would go with my junior friends and we would sit out back on, such and such a truck and smoke 2 cigarettes together. That all then allows you to think about, oh, all those times you maybe did that with your own friends and family.
We always called smoking cigarettes at that time, smoking OPs, other people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a lot of smoking in my young life. Yeah, I'm gonna answer the question from Larissa, which is, I take so much inspiration from a lot of writers. I take inspiration from writers who don't write nonfiction. So I love like my favorite author. Well, she writes a lot of nonfiction, but who don't write narrative nonfiction. So I take a lot of inspiration from Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things, which is my favorite novel, and is an incredible essayist and social critic. The 2 folks that I've mentioned, Megan Steelstra and Jakira Diaz, have been really big influences on my work. I really love Nick Flynn, who is a poet and a nonfiction writer. His book, specifically Bullshit Night in Suck City, is just an incredible, I think, examination of some of the things that really inform this work. And I have to shout out all the great Chicago writers. So I have to shout out Stuart Dybek, the incredible short story writer whose Coast of Chicago is probably my favorite book. I have to shout out poets like Nate Marshall. I have to shout out Eve Ewing, who was another incredible poet that maybe you all know. And then Michael Zapata, who wrote this incredible novel that is the Last Days of Adana Moreau. So I don't know, I take inspiration from everywhere. I take inspiration from songwriters as well. And, I think that for me, the process of creating is also pulling in from a lot of different places. So, yeah. What is your writing process? That's a really good question. I'll be honest, I haven't had a writing process since this book came out. And it's just been a bit of a challenge to get back in the groove of things, but I like to write in the mornings before the whatever from the day kind of comes in. And I love to write longhand first. And so for me, like writing longhand is what allows me to really slow down, to really settle with my thoughts. And it also helps me not get distracted because if I'm on a computer, then I could turn the internet on and I could check the sports scores and I can go on Twitter, and that's just not good for anybody. And so for me, the writing process happens. It starts on the physical page that then moves to a computer. And then the real writing process is actually crafting it with other people. You know, whether that's a writing group or friends or with Second Story. The process of revising is very important to me because I feel like I need at least a little bit of an audience of people that I admire and trust to give me their feedback as well. So, yeah. So shout out to the book is available in the chat. I just found out today it's in its second printing, which is very exciting for me. So yeah, if there are any other questions, I can stick around for a little bit, but otherwise I'm deeply appreciative to everyone who listened.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Nick, for talking with us tonight and sharing your work. Oh, you do have another question.
No second book in the works. No, there's nothing. There is no second book in the works. I have some other stuff going on that I am not privy to discuss that has nothing to do with art. And so I am not writing a second book currently, but maybe down the line. Thank you. That's a great question. Go ahead, Larissa.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. Like Nick had mentioned, I did put a link in the chat to our local bookstore, Galena Book and Paper. They do have the book available in their online store as well as physically in the store downtown here on Main Street. So, and Jason did read it. Jason at Galena Book and Paper, and he really enjoyed it. So there's a.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you. Shout out to local independent bookstores. They are the lifeblood, not just of books, but of culture and public space. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
As
Well,
our
thank you very
libraries.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's here to check out as well.
Great. Well, I am so grateful. I wish I could be in Galena myself, but I'm so grateful that you all had me and put up with the travel issues. So thanks.